If you can dance this waltz, the billionaire's voice echoed through the ballroom, his cruel smile cutting deeper than any blade. Then, I will marry my son to you. The words hung in the air like poison as 60 of Boston's elite watched the maid's world crumble, but what they didn't know was that she'd once been a champion. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, 3 weeks earlier on a bitter February morning in Boston. Keisha Washington pressed her knees into the cold Italian marble, scrubbing at a wine stain that refused to surrender. Her dark hands moved in practiced circles, muscles aching from 4 hours of work before dawn. The Pemberton mansion stretched around her like a cathedral of wealth, 37 rooms of imported everything, each piece worth thousands of dollars. Just another day to scrub another stubborn stain for my paychecks, she thought. At 28, Keisha had perfected the art of invisibility. Her uniform hung loose on her lean frame, hiding the dancer's posture that once commanded stages. She'd tied her thick black hair back severely, no trace of the woman who used to sparkle under spotlights. Her face, naturally beautiful with high cheekbones and warm brown eyes, remained carefully neutral. Servants who showed personality didn't last long in houses like this. The clock in the foyer chimed 7 times. Soon the family would descend for breakfast, and she needed to disappear before they noticed her. Rich people preferred their magic to happen without witnessing the hands that performed it. Keisha! Mrs. Hartford's sharp voice cut through the silence. The head housekeeper appeared at the top of the marble staircase, her gray hair pulled into a tight knot. Master Reginald wants the ballroom spotless by noon. The Vanderbilts are coming for dinner. Keisha's chest tightened. The ballroom. Of all the rooms in this mansion, that one held the most ghosts. Yes, ma'am. And remember, the chandelier needs hand polishing. Every crystal. Of course it does. Keisha gathered her supplies, her body already protesting the thought of reaching those impossible heights. As she walked toward the ballroom, her reflection caught in the hallway mirrors. For just a moment, she saw her younger self, confident, radiant, alive. Then reality crashed back, and she was just the maid again. Oliver Pemberton stood at the window of the 52nd floor, watching Boston Common shrink below him like a child's toy. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly, his sandy brown hair styled precisely, his blue eyes reflecting nothing but careful emptiness. At 29, he'd mastered the art of looking successful while feeling dead inside. The Singapore deal requires your signature. His assistant, Jennifer, placed another stack of contracts on his desk. Oliver didn't turn around. Down below, couples walked hand in hand through the snow-dusted park. Valentine's Day. He couldn't remember the last time the date meant anything to him. His father had arranged 3 different relationships over the years, each one ending when the woman realized Oliver's heart wasn't available for purchase. Maybe because I don't have one anymore. Sir, leave them on the desk. His reflection stared back from the window, hollow, polished, perfect. Just like his father wanted. Cancel my lunch. I need air. Jennifer hesitated. But the merger meeting. Cancel it. Oliver grabbed his coat, suddenly desperate to escape the glass tomb his life had become. He needed to walk, to breathe, to remember what it felt like to be human. 20 minutes later, he found himself on Newberry Street, snow catching in his hair as he wandered aimlessly past boutiques and cafes. Couples everywhere, laughing, touching, alive. When had he stopped believing in any of it? When had love become just another business transaction in his father's world? His smartphone vibrated. A text from Dad. Dinner tonight. Catherine's coming over. The Vanderbilt are bringing their daughter. It's high time you settled down. Oliver stared at the message until the screen went black. Another arranged introduction. Another perfectly suitable woman who would smile at his bank account and never see his soul. He shoved the phone back in his pocket and kept walking, his breath forming clouds in the February air. That evening at the Pemberton estate, Keisha's arms burned as she polished the final crystal on the ballroom chandelier. The ladder wobbled slightly, but she held steady, muscle memory from her dancing days keeping her balanced. Below her, the ballroom gleamed like a jewel, polished parquet floors that once knew her footsteps, mirrors that once reflected her joy. She climbed down carefully, her back screaming in protest. The room was perfect now, ready for another evening of people who would never see her, never know her story, never guess that she'd once danced in rooms twice as grand as this one. Stop. Don't go there. That life is dead. But as she gathered her cleaning supplies, Keisha caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. For a heartbeat, she stood taller, her chin lifted, her eyes bright. Then she heard footsteps and quickly bent to collect her rags. "Excuse me." The voice was different from the usual barked commands. Softer. Uncertain. Keisha looked up to find Oliver Pemberton standing in the doorway, his perfect suit slightly wrinkled, his hair messed by the wind. Up close, his eyes weren't empty at all. They held a sadness that made her chest ache. "I'm sorry, Master Oliver. I was just finishing." She started to hurry past him. "Wait." He stepped into the ballroom, his footsteps echoing. "This room is beautiful. Do you ever dance in here?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Keisha's hands trembled around her cleaning supplies. "I'm just the maid, sir. That's not what I asked." Oliver moved closer, and she caught his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something warmer, more human. "When you're alone in here, do you ever wonder what it would feel like?" "Every single day." But Keisha couldn't say that. Couldn't let him see the dreams she'd buried so deep they barely breathed anymore. "I should go, sir. Dinner will be served soon." Oliver watched her retreat, something flickering in his expression. "What's your name?" She paused at the doorway, not turning around. "Keisha Washington, sir." "Keisha." He said it like he was tasting something sweet. "That's a beautiful name." And then she was gone, fleeing down the servants' corridor while her heart raced and her mind screamed warnings. Rich boys didn't see maids as people. They saw them as conveniences, diversions, mistakes waiting to happen. But as she reached her small room in the basement, Keisha caught herself humming, a waltz melody she hadn't heard in 7 years. 3 hours later, the Waterford crystal caught the candlelight as Keisha moved silently between the chairs, refilling wine glasses with practiced precision. The dining room hummed with the kind of conversation that came with old money, stock portfolios, charity galas, summer homes in the Hamptons. She was furniture to these people, invisible hands that made their evening perfect. At the head of the mahogany table sat Reginald Pemberton, 63 years of ruthless business dealings carved into his angular face. His silver hair was slicked back, his charcoal eyes cold as winter stone. Even seated, he commanded the room with the presence of a man who'd crushed competitors for breakfast and served their remains for dinner. "Catherine, you simply must tell Oliver about your equestrian achievements," Mrs. Vanderbilt gushed, her diamond necklace catching the light as she gestured toward her daughter. Catherine Vanderbilt was everything Reginald wanted in a daughter-in-law. Blonde, beautiful, and bred for this world. Her pink silk dress probably cost more than Keisha's annual salary. She smiled at Oliver with perfectly practiced charm, her blue eyes calculating his net worth with every glance. "I took first place at the Devon Horse Show last autumn," Catherine said, her voice carrying that particular blend of confidence and entitlement that came with never being told no. "Daddy bought me a new mare to celebrate. A gorgeous Hanoverian named Duchess." Oliver nodded politely, cutting his steak into precise squares he didn't eat. "That's wonderful, Catherine." Keisha noticed how he avoided the woman's gaze, how his jaw tightened when Catherine leaned closer. She'd seen that look before on her own face in mirrors when she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. "He's drowning just like I am." "Oliver has always been too modest about his own accomplishments," Reginald's voice boomed across the table. "Harvard Business School, summa cum laude. Youngest VP in Pemberton Industries history. Any woman would be lucky to call him husband." The words hit the room like stones dropped in still water. Catherine's smile brightened. Oliver's fork clattered against his plate. And Keisha, reaching for an empty wine bottle near Oliver's elbow, felt her stomach twist with something that had no business existing. "Stop it. He's not yours to want." "Speaking of marriage," Mrs. Vanderbilt practically purred, "Catherine was just telling me how much she's looking forward to settling down. She has such wonderful ideas for redecorating whatever estate her future husband provides." The Beacon Hill property could use a woman's touch, Reginald agreed, his cold gaze moving between Catherine and Oliver like a chess master planning his next victory. 47 rooms should provide adequate space for entertaining and raising children. Oliver's hand tightened around his wine glass. Father, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Nonsense. The Vanderbilts are practically family already. Reginald's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. In fact, I have a proposal that will make this evening memorable for everyone. The room fell silent except for the crackling fireplace. Keisha felt the tension shift, the way air pressure changed before a storm. She should leave, disappear into the kitchen, but something kept her frozen in place. As you all know, I'm a man who appreciates tradition, Reginald continued, rising from his chair. Elegance. Breeding. The lost arts that separate civilization from chaos. He walked to the fireplace, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Take the waltz, for instance. A dance that requires grace, partnership, refinement. Not something everyone can master. Where is he going with this? I propose a little challenge. Reginald's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. A test of worthiness, if you will. Father. Oliver's voice carried a warning. But Reginald was just getting started. He turned to face the room, his gaze sweeping past Catherine, past the Vanderbilts, past Oliver, and landing squarely on Keisha. You there, girl. Come here. Every head in the room turned toward her. Keisha's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She'd survived 7 years by being invisible, and now she stood spotlighted in the middle of her worst nightmare. Sir. Her voice barely carried across the room. What's your name again? Keisha Washington, sir. Each word felt like glass in her throat. Keisha Washington. Reginald repeated it like he was testing how it tasted. Tell me, Keisha Washington, do you believe in fairy tales? The question was a trap. She could feel it, could see the cruel satisfaction building in his eyes. I'm not sure I understand, sir. Of course you don't. His laugh was harsh. Let me explain. My son is a catch. Wouldn't you agree? Handsome, wealthy, intelligent. Any woman would be fortunate to marry him. Keisha's chest constricted. Around the table, she could see the Vanderbilts' confusion, Catherine's growing alarm, Oliver's dawning horror as he realized what his father was building toward. But worthiness must be earned, Reginald continued. Demonstrated. So here's my proposition, and I want everyone in this room to witness it. He moved closer to Keisha, his presence like a shadow falling across her. If you can waltz with my son for 3 minutes without making a fool of yourself, if you can prove that breeding and class don't matter, then I'll personally pay for your wedding to Oliver. The room exploded. Reginald, what are you doing? Mrs. Vanderbilt gasped. This is outrageous. Catherine's perfect composure cracked. Father, stop this right now. Oliver shot to his feet. But Reginald raised his hand for silence, his eyes never leaving Keisha's face. Of course, when you fail, as we both know you will, you'll resign your position immediately and never set foot in this house again. A small price to pay for reaching so far above your station. The words hit Keisha like physical blows. Around her, the room spun with shocked faces and harsh whispers. She could feel her carefully constructed walls crumbling, 7 years of protection dissolving under the weight of public humiliation. This is what happens when you forget your place. The girl obviously can't dance, Catherine said, her voice dripping with disdain. Look at her. She's a maid. Exactly my point, Reginald smiled like a predator who'd just cornered his prey. 3 minutes, girl. In the ballroom. Tomorrow evening when the Hendersons join us for dinner. Fail, and you disappear forever. Keisha's vision blurred. Her hands shook. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee back to her basement room and pack her few belongings before this nightmare got worse. But then Oliver spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. I accept. Everyone turned to stare at him. He stood beside his chair, his perfect posture radiating defiance, his blue eyes blazing with something Keisha had never seen before. Oliver, no, Catherine breathed. You can't be serious. Mrs. Vanderbilt added. But Oliver wasn't looking at them. His gaze found Keisha across the room, and in that moment, she saw something that made her knees weak. He wasn't looking at her like she was the maid. He was looking at her like she was worth fighting for. "If Keisha agrees to dance with me," Oliver said, his voice steady and sure, "then I accept my father's challenge." "He's protecting me." "Why is he protecting me?" Reginald's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, son." "Maybe. But it's my mistake to make." Oliver took a step toward Keisha, his hand extended. "The question is, will you dance with me?" The room held its breath. Keisha felt the weight of every stare, every judgment, every assumption about who she was and what she deserved. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the two parts of her soul went to war. The scared maid whispered, "Say no. Run. This will destroy you." But underneath, buried deep where she'd tried to kill it, her champion's heart whispered something else. "Show them who you really are." Keisha looked at Oliver's outstretched hand, then at his face, then at the room full of people who'd already decided she would fail. 3 minutes. Just 3 minutes to prove I'm more than what they see. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, her dancer's voice finding its strength. "Yes, I'll dance with you." The room erupted again, but Keisha barely heard it. All she could see was Oliver's smile, genuine and warm and completely different from every expression she'd seen him wear before. "Excellent." Reginald clapped his hands together, his satisfaction complete. "Tomorrow evening then. 7 o'clock sharp. The entire Boston social circle will be watching." As the dinner party dissolved into shocked whispers and heated conversations, Oliver moved closer to Keisha. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "My father is cruel, but he's not wrong about the consequences if I fail." Keisha met his gaze, feeling something shift inside her chest. "What if I don't?" For the first time since she'd known him, Oliver Pemberton smiled like he meant it. "Then I guess we'll find out what happens when fairy tales come true." As Keisha left the dining room on unsteady legs, her mind raced with the magnitude of what she'd just agreed to. Tomorrow evening, in front of Boston's elite, she would either reclaim the woman she used to be or lose everything she'd built to survive. But as she walked down the servants' corridor toward her room, she realized something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. For the first time in 7 years, she wanted to dance. In Keisha's basement room, Keisha sat on her narrow bed, staring at her trembling hands in the pale morning light filtering through her single basement window. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Reginald's voice echoing through the dining room, felt the weight of every stare, saw Oliver's hand extended toward her like a lifeline she had no right to grasp. What have I done? Her room was Spartanly simple, a twin bed with white sheets, a small dresser, a mirror she rarely looked into. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that connected her to the woman she used to be. She'd built this life on the foundation of forgetting, and now one moment of weakness had shattered 7 years of careful construction. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from her sister Maya in Atlanta, saw the news online. Boston Globe already picked it up. Billionaire's son to dance with maid. Call me. Keisha's stomach dropped. The news was already out. Of course it was. In a city like Boston, scandals involving the Pemberton family spread faster than winter flu. By noon, every society page would be running the story. By evening, she'd be a laughingstock across New England. I should leave. Pack right now and disappear before this gets worse. She pulled out her single suitcase and started folding her uniforms with mechanical precision. 3 gray dresses, 4 white aprons, 2 pairs of sensible black shoes. The costume of invisibility she'd worn for 7 years. In 30 minutes, she could be on a bus to anywhere, just another woman running from her mistakes. But as she reached for her few personal items, her fingers brushed against something she'd forgotten was there. Hidden beneath her spare pillowcase was a small wooden music box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. She lifted the lid with shaking hands, and a familiar waltz melody tinkled into the silence. No, put it away. That life is dead. Instead, she found herself remembering. The music box had been her grandmother's, the same woman who'd taught her to dance in the living room of their tiny apartment in Roxbury. Dancing is praying with your body, baby girl, Nana used to say. It's telling God you trust him to catch you when you fall. Keisha snapped the box shut and shoved it back under the pillowcase. That woman, that little girl who believed in magic and music and dreams, had died the night she'd lost everything that mattered. What remained was just survival. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. Washington. Mrs. Hartford wants to see you. Now. Keisha's heart sank. Of course. Time to face the consequences. Meanwhile, upstairs in the study, Oliver stood at his father's desk, his knuckles white as he gripped the leather chair. The morning sun streaming through the windows felt like mockery, too bright for the storm brewing in his chest. "You've lost your mind," Reginald said, not looking up from his newspaper. The Boston Globe was spread across the mahogany surface, the headline exactly as damning as Oliver had expected. Pemberton Heirs' shocking dinner party challenge. "Have I?" Oliver's voice was steady, but inside he was anything but calm. All night he'd paced his room, trying to understand what had possessed him to accept his father's cruel game. All he knew was that watching Keisha's face crumble under the weight of public humiliation had awakened something fierce and protective in his chest. "The girl will embarrass herself and you along with her," Reginald continued, his tone conversational as if discussing the weather. 3 minutes of public failure, and then this nonsense will be over. Catherine will forgive you, the Vanderbilts will overlook your momentary insanity, and we can get back to business." "And if she doesn't fail?" Reginald's laugh was harsh. "She's a maid, Oliver. A girl who cleans toilets for a living. You think she's hiding some secret talent that will magically transform her into Ginger Rogers?" Oliver thought about the way Keisha had moved through the ballroom the night before, her posture unconsciously graceful even while carrying cleaning supplies. There had been something in her eyes when he'd asked about dancing, a flicker of recognition that suggested depths he didn't understand. "You don't know anything about her," Oliver said. "I know enough. I know her type. Ambitious girls who think they can sleep their way into a better life. She's probably been planning this seduction for months." The accusation hit Oliver like a slap. "She never pursued me. Never even looked at me until yesterday." "Of course she did. She's just better at the game than most." Reginald finally looked up, his cold eyes assessing. "This is exactly why I arranged your engagement to Catherine. She comes from our world. She understands the rules. She won't try to reach above her station. Maybe I don't want someone who understands the rules." The words surprised Oliver with their vehemence. "Maybe I want someone real." "Real." Reginald stood, his presence filling the room like a thundercloud. "Reality is what I've built for you. Security, legacy, power. Everything I didn't have growing up in that tenement in South Boston." Oliver had heard this speech before, the story of his father's rise from poverty to prominence through ruthless determination and strategic marriages. It was supposed to inspire gratitude, but today it just sounded like justification for cruelty. "You think you're protecting me," Oliver said quietly. "But you're suffocating me. I'm saving you from making the same mistake your grandfather made." Reginald's voice turned razor-sharp. He married for love. A beautiful girl from the wrong side of town. Know what it got him? Bankruptcy, shame, and an early grave. I spent my entire childhood paying for his romantic delusions. Maybe he was happy. Happy doesn't pay for Harvard. Happy doesn't build empires. Happy doesn't ensure your children never know what it's like to wear second-hand clothes and pretend they don't care. The raw pain in his father's voice caught Oliver off guard. For a moment, he saw past the ruthless businessman to the scared boy who'd sworn never to be vulnerable again. But then Reginald's expression hardened. "The maid will fail, son. And when she does, you'll thank me for saving you from your own foolishness." Keisha stood in front of Mrs. Hartford's desk, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their shaking. The head housekeeper was 62 years old, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, a woman who'd managed wealthy households for 4 decades. She'd given Keisha a chance 7 years ago when no one else would, and now Keisha was about to repay that kindness with scandal. "Sit down, child." Keisha perched on the edge of the wooden chair, her spine straight. Years of dance training had taught her perfect posture, even in moments of terror. "I suppose you know why you're here," Mrs. Hartford said, her Scottish accent softening the words. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I know I've put you in an impossible position." "Have you now?" Mrs. Hartford leaned back in her chair, studying Keisha with shrewd eyes. "Tell me what happened in that dining room." Keisha recounted the evening, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. Mrs. Hartford listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. "So you said yes," Mrs. Hartford said when Keisha finished. "I did. I don't know why. I should have refused, should have known better than to." "Than to what?" "Stand up for yourself." The question caught Keisha off guard. "Ma'am, I've worked in houses like this for 40 years, dear. I've seen how men like Reginald Pemberton treat people they consider beneath them. Cruelty dressed up as amusement." Mrs. Hartford's eyes flashed with something that might have been approval. "What I've never seen is someone with the courage to call their bluff." "I'm going to fail. I'm going to embarrass myself and this household and—" "Are you?" Keisha blinked. "What? Are you going to fail?" Mrs. Hartford leaned forward. "Because the girl I've watched for 7 years, the one who moves like water and carries herself like royalty even when she's scrubbing floors, that girl doesn't strike me as someone who fails at anything she truly commits to." The words hit Keisha like a physical blow. Mrs. Hartford had seen her, really seen her, in ways Keisha thought she'd successfully hidden. "I used to dance," Keisha whispered. "A long time ago." "I know, dear. The way you move gave it away years ago." Mrs. Hartford's voice was gentle. "Question is, do you still remember how?" Keisha's throat tightened. "It doesn't matter. That woman is gone. Is she? Or is she just scared?" Before Keisha could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Heavy, purposeful steps that could only belong to one person. Reginald Pemberton appeared in the doorway, his presence immediately commanding the small space. "Mrs. Hartford, I need to speak with Miss Washington." "Alone." Mrs. Hartford stood slowly, her protective instincts clearly warring with decades of professional deference. "Of course, sir." As she passed Keisha's chair, she whispered so quietly only Keisha could hear, "Remember who you are, not who they tell you to be." When they were alone, Reginald closed the door and turned to face Keisha. His smile was cold enough to freeze blood. "Let's discuss terms," he said. "Sir, for your resignation, I'm prepared to be generous. A year's salary, glowing references, help finding a new position in another city. All you have to do is admit this was a mistake and disappear before tonight's dinner." Keisha stared at him. A year's salary would change everything for her and Maya. She could go back to school, maybe even try to rebuild some version of the life she'd lost. "All I have to do is run away," she said. "All you have to do is be smart." Reginald moved closer. "You think this is about you, but it's not. It's about teaching my son that actions have consequences. That romantic gestures don't change reality." "And if I refuse?" "Then tomorrow evening you'll dance for 3 minutes while Boston's finest society watches you fall apart. Your humiliation will be complete and public, and you'll leave anyway. But instead of generous severance, you'll leave with nothing but the clothes on your back and a reputation that will follow you wherever you go." The threat was clear. Take the money and disappear quietly, or face public destruction. Keisha thought about her sister Maya, working double shifts as a nurse in Atlanta to pay off student loans. Thought about her own empty bank account, the constant fear of one medical emergency or car repair destroying the fragile stability she'd built. Then she thought about Oliver's face when he'd stood up to his father. The way he'd looked at her like she was worth defending. "I need time to think," she said. "You have until noon." Reginald checked his expensive watch. "Choose wisely, Miss Washington. Fairy tales are for children. Adults live in the real world." After he left, Keisha sat alone in the silent office, her hands shaking as the magnitude of her situation crashed over her. In 6 hours, she would either take the money and disappear forever, or commit to a course that would likely destroy everything she'd worked to build. What would Nana do? But even as she asked the question, Keisha already knew the answer. Her grandmother had faced down poverty, racism, and a world that told her she wasn't worth anything, and she'd never stopped dancing. The question is, am I my grandmother's granddaughter, or am I just a frightened girl pretending to be strong? Outside, Boston awakened to another February morning, unaware that in a basement room and a mansion study, two people were making choices that would change everything. Keisha found herself in the conservatory without remembering how she'd gotten there. The glass-walled room stretched along the mansion's east wing, filled with exotic plants and the kind of natural light her basement room never saw. Orchids bloomed in impossible colors while ivy cascaded down the windows like green waterfalls. She'd been wandering the house for hours, avoiding Mrs. Hartford, avoiding the other staff, avoiding the decision that pressed against her chest like a physical weight. Reginald's deadline loomed. 30 minutes to choose between money and dignity, safety and truth. Take the money. Be smart. Survive. But every time she tried to convince herself, she heard Mrs. Hartford's voice. Remember who you are, not who they tell you to be. The conservatory door opened behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She'd grown hyper-aware of Oliver's presence, the way his footsteps sounded different from everyone else's, the way the air seemed to change when he entered a room. I thought I might find you here, he said quietly. Keisha kept her back to him, studying a particularly vibrant orchid as if it held the secrets of the universe. Shouldn't you be at the office? Important merger meetings and all that. I couldn't concentrate. Oliver moved to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly brushing hers. My father made you an offer, didn't he? She finally looked at him. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his usually perfect hair was mussed from running his fingers through it. He looked as lost as she felt. How did you know? Because I know my father. He doesn't believe in fair fights. Oliver's jaw tightened. What did he offer? A year's salary. References. Help finding work in another city. The words felt like stones in her mouth. All I have to do is admit this was a mistake and disappear. Oliver was silent for a long moment, staring out at the snow-covered garden beyond the glass walls. Maybe you should take it. The words hit her like a slap. What? This was my fight, not yours. I dragged you into it because I was angry at my father, but I never stopped to think about what it would cost you. Oliver turned to face her, his blue eyes filled with guilt. You could have a fresh start. Somewhere no one knows about tonight, about any of this. Keisha studied his face, seeing past the guilt to something deeper. Fear. He was as terrified as she was, but for different reasons. Is that what you want? She asked. For me to disappear? What I want doesn't matter. Oliver's voice was rough. You don't owe me anything. You certainly don't owe my father a performance just to prove some point about class and breeding. And what about you? What happens when I'm gone and you're still trapped in that golden cage? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I'll marry Catherine. Make my father happy. Live the life that was planned for me before I was born. The life you hate. The life I understand. Oliver moved closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. You know what the crazy part is? Yesterday morning, I was resigned to it. Accepted that this was all there was. Then I saw you in the ballroom, and for one moment, I thought maybe. Maybe what? Maybe there was something more. Something real. He laughed bitterly. Pathetic, right? 29 years old and still believing in fairy tales. Keisha felt something crack open in her chest. This man, who had everything money could buy, was as empty and lost as she'd been 7 years ago when her world collapsed. What if it's not pathetic? She said quietly. What if believing in something more is the only thing that keeps us human? Oliver looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the exact moment when his careful walls started to crumble. You're not going to take his offer, are you? I don't know. Keisha moved to a small bench nestled between two towering ferns. Part of me wants to run. The smart part, the part that's kept me alive for 7 years. And the other part? The other part remembers what it felt like to be fearless. She touched the bench beside her, and after a moment's hesitation, Oliver sat down. I used to dance, you know. Before I came here. I thought so. The way you move, it's like you're hearing music the rest of us can't. His observation was so accurate it made her breath catch. I was good. Really good. I had dreams of performing with the Boston Ballet, maybe even making it to New York someday. What happened? The question she'd been dreading for 7 years. The story she'd never told anyone, not even Mrs. Hartford. But something about the way Oliver waited, patient and non-judgmental, made the words rise to her lips. I fell in love with the wrong man, she said simply. Preston Kingsley. He was a patron of the arts, old Boston money, married to someone else. But he made me believe it didn't matter, that love was stronger than convention. Oliver was very still beside her, listening with a kind of attention she'd forgotten existed. He promised to leave his wife. Said we'd go to New York together, that he'd support my career. I believed him because I was 21 and stupid and thought love conquered everything. Keisha's voice hardened. Instead, he got tired of me and discarded me like yesterday's newspaper. But not before making sure I'd never dance professionally in Boston again. He destroyed your career? He had connections everywhere. Suddenly, no company would audition me. No studio would hire me. I went from rising star to unemployable in the span of a month. The old pain was still there, duller now but never truly gone. I had to choose between leaving the city I loved or finding another way to survive. So you became invisible. I became smart. I stopped believing in fairy tales and started living in reality. Keisha met his gaze. Just like you did. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by impossible blooms and winter light. Two people who'd learned to bury their dreams so deep they'd almost forgotten how to want anything. Can I ask you something? Oliver said finally. Sure. When my father made his challenge, when everyone was staring at you like you were some kind of curiosity, why didn't you just walk away? Keisha considered the question. Because for 30 seconds, I forgot to be afraid. For 30 seconds, I remembered what it felt like to be the woman who could dance anything, conquer anything, become anything. She looked down at her hands, calloused from years of cleaning. I guess I missed her more than I realized. I miss who I used to be too, Oliver said quietly. Before I learned that wanting something was the same as setting yourself up for disappointment. Who were you? Before. Oliver smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, it reached his eyes. I wanted to be a teacher. Elementary school. I know it sounds crazy, given everything my father built, but I loved working with kids. They see possibilities everywhere, you know? They haven't learned yet that dreams are just preludes to failure. That's not crazy at all. Keisha found herself smiling back. It's beautiful. My father called it a waste of potential. Said I had obligations, responsibilities to the family legacy. Oliver's expression darkened. Maybe he was right. Maybe some of us are born to carry other people's dreams instead of chasing our own. Or maybe we just forgot how to fight for what matters. Before Oliver could respond, the conservatory door burst open. Mrs. Hartford appeared, her face flushed with uncharacteristic excitement. There you are, she said, slightly breathless. Both of you need to come with me. Now. Mrs. Hartford, what's wrong? Oliver stood, instantly alert. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, if we move quickly. She beckoned them toward the door. I've been making calls all morning. Turns out I have friends you don't know about, Miss Washington. Keisha felt her heart begin to race. What kind of friends? The kind who remember when you were the most promising dancer Boston had seen in a generation. Mrs. Hartford's eyes sparkled with something that looked dangerously like hope. The kind who've been wondering what happened to you all these years. I don't understand. Elena Vasquez. She runs the Cambridge Academy of Dance now. She was your teacher at the conservatory, wasn't she? Keisha's world tilted. Elena Vasquez had been her mentor, her champion, the woman who'd seen her potential and nurtured it until it bloomed into something extraordinary. She'd also been the first person to turn her back when Preston's influence destroyed her reputation. She won't want to see me, Keisha whispered. She's been waiting in the blue sitting room for 20 minutes, Mrs. Hartford said firmly. And she brought someone with her. Someone you definitely need to meet. Oliver stepped closer to Keisha, his presence steadying. Who? Mrs. Hartford's smile was triumphant. Marcus Chen, principal dancer with the Boston Ballet until he retired last year. Now he coaches private students. She paused for dramatic effect. He has opinions about what happened to you 7 years ago. Strong opinions. Keisha's knees went weak. Marcus Chen was a legend, a dancer whose name was whispered with reverence in studios across the country. If Elena Vasquez had brought him here, if they wanted to see her. I can't, she breathed. I'm not ready. I haven't trained in years. I can't just. You can, Oliver said, his voice strong and sure. Whatever happened before, whoever told you that you weren't good enough, they were wrong. I've seen the way you move, Keisha. Even when you're trying to hide it, you move like music made flesh. Mrs. Hartford nodded approvingly. The boy's right. Question is, are you brave enough to find out who you still are underneath all that fear? Keisha looked between them, these two people who believed in her more than she believed in herself. Outside the conservatory windows, snow began to fall again, covering the world in possibilities as white and clean as fresh hope. This is it. The moment when I choose who I want to be for the rest of my life. Okay, she whispered, then stronger. Okay, let's go find out. The blue sitting room had always been Keisha's favorite in the mansion. Decorated in soft shades of navy and cream, with tall windows that caught the afternoon light, it felt more welcoming than the formal spaces where the Pembertons entertained. Today, however, walking through its doorway felt like stepping into her own past. Elena Vasquez rose from the velvet settee, and Keisha's breath caught. Her former teacher was 58 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, but she still moved with the liquid grace that had made her a prima ballerina with the American Ballet Theatre 3 decades ago. Beside her stood a man Keisha recognized from countless photographs and programs. Marcus Chen, tall and lean with silver-touched black hair, his dancer's posture unmistakable even in retirement. Keisha! Elena's voice was exactly as Keisha remembered it, warm with a slight Spanish accent that had never faded despite 40 years in America. My dear girl, look at you. Keisha felt 17 again, standing in Elena's studio with sweat-dampened hair and hope shining in her eyes. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who scrubbed floors and hid from the world. Miss Vasquez. Mr. Chen. Keisha's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't understand why you're here. Because 7 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my teaching career, Elena said, her dark eyes filled with regret. And I've been trying to find a way to make it right ever since. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his quiet demeanor. May I sit? This conversation requires honesty, and honesty requires comfort. Mrs. Hartford gestured to the chairs arranged in a circle. Oliver hesitated in the doorway until Keisha caught his eye and nodded. Whatever was about to happen, she needed his steadying presence. As they settled into their seats, Elena leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Keisha, what I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear. But you deserve the truth about what happened to your career. I know what happened, Keisha said, her voice hollow. Preston made some calls, spread some lies, and suddenly no one wanted to work with me. That's what we all believed, Marcus said gently. What we were meant to believe. But the truth is far more complicated. Elena's expression darkened. Preston Kingsley didn't just destroy your reputation, Mia Moore. He paid people to do it. Substantial amounts of money to directors, choreographers, company managers. Anyone with the power to hire you. The words hit Keisha like physical blows. She'd known Preston was influential, but the idea that he'd actually bribed people to keep her unemployed felt impossibly cruel. Why? The question came out broken. Why go that far? Because his wife found out about the affair, Marcus said quietly. Margaret Kingsley comes from old Brahmin money, the kind that makes the Pembertons look middle class. When she discovered Preston's relationship with you, she threatened divorce. That would have cost him everything. Elena nodded grimly. So he chose to destroy you instead of risk losing his inheritance. He made sure you could never dance professionally in Boston, then convinced his wife it was over. Problem solved. But that's not the worst part, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with disgust. 3 months after you disappeared from the dance world, Preston started another affair. A 17-year-old student at the conservatory. He'd developed a pattern. Keisha felt the room spin around her. 7 years of believing she'd been naive, foolish, somehow complicit in her own destruction. 7 years of carrying shame that was never hers to bear. You knew all this, she said, looking at Elena. You knew, and you still turned your back on me. Elena's face crumpled. I was threatened too. Preston's people made it clear that if I helped you, if I spoke out about what really happened, the Cambridge Academy would lose its funding. 70 students would have nowhere to train. I told myself I was protecting them, but the truth is I was protecting myself. I was a coward. The admission hung in the air like a blade. Oliver shifted in his chair, his jaw tight with anger at these revelations about the man who'd destroyed Keisha's life. Why are you telling me this now? Keisha asked. Marcus leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. Because Preston Kingsley died last month. Massive heart attack at his country club. With him gone, the people he paid finally feel free to talk. And because Elena and I have been investigating what happened to you for the past 2 years, Marcus continued. We've been tracking down everyone who was involved, documenting the bribes, gathering evidence. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. Sworn affidavits from 6 company directors admitting they were paid to blacklist you. Financial records showing the money transfers. Everything you need to clear your name. Keisha stared at the folder like it might bite her. I don't understand. Why would you do all this? Because I saw you dance, Marcus said simply. In 2018, at the regional competition in Hartford, you performed a variation from Giselle that made grown men weep. I've seen thousands of dancers in my career, Keisha. Maybe 50 had real talent. Maybe 10 had the kind of gift that transcends technique. He paused, his voice dropping to reverence. You were one of the 10. The words should have filled her with joy, but instead Keisha felt only emptiness. That was 7 years ago. I'm 28 now. My body isn't what it was. I haven't trained seriously since. Since you were driven away by lies and corruption, Elena interrupted fiercely. Keisha, your body remembers. Your soul remembers. Dance isn't something you lose, it's something you carry. Besides, Marcus added with a slight smile, 28 isn't old in the dance world anymore. Misty Copeland was dancing principal roles into her 30s. There are companies actively seeking mature artists with life experience. Oliver, who had been silent throughout the revelations, finally spoke. What are you asking her to do? Marcus and Elena exchanged glances. We want to train her, Elena said. Intensive coaching to get her performance ready. Marcus has connections with contemporary companies in New York, Los Angeles, even internationally. But first, Marcus said, his expression growing serious, we want to help her with tonight. Tonight. Keisha's heart stopped. Mrs. Hartford told us about the challenge, Elena said. About what that horrible man is forcing you to endure. It's exactly the kind of class-based humiliation that allows people like Preston Kingsley to thrive. Marcus stood and moved to the window, his dancer's grace evident in every step. A waltz is just storytelling through movement. 3 minutes to show the world who you really are. I can't, Keisha whispered. I'm not ready. I don't have the right clothes, the right shoes. I haven't danced with a partner in years. You have us, Elena said firmly. We brought everything you need. Music, shoes, even a dress that will make you look like the queen you've always been. More importantly, Marcus added, turning back to face them, you have something Reginald Pemberton doesn't expect. You have truth on your side. Oliver leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean? I mean that man's entire challenge is based on the assumption that breeding and class determine worth, Marcus explained. He's counting on Keisha to be exactly what he thinks she is, an untrained servant who will embarrass herself trying to play in his world. But she's not, Elena continued, her voice building with excitement. She's a trained artist whose talent was stolen from her by corruption and greed. When she dances tonight, she's not just proving him wrong about her. She's proving him wrong about everything he believes. Keisha felt something stirring in her chest, a warmth she'd thought was dead forever. For 7 years, she'd carried Preston's lies like stones in her heart, believing she was somehow complicit in her own destruction. But the truth was different. She hadn't failed. She'd been sabotaged. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "Something Mrs. Hartford mentioned that makes tonight even more significant." "What?" "The waltz your father challenged you to dance," Elena said, consulting her notes. "It's the Blue Danube. Do you know why that's important?" Keisha shook her head. "Because it's the same waltz you performed at the regional competition in Hartford. The one that made Marcus cry. You've danced it before, beautifully, powerfully." Elena's smile was radiant. "It's like the universe is giving you a chance to reclaim not just your dignity, but your artistry." The room fell silent as the weight of coincidence settled over them. Of all the waltzes Reginald could have chosen, he'd picked the one that showcased Keisha's greatest strength. Oliver broke the silence. "It's like he's handed you the perfect weapon to destroy his own argument." "Exactly," Marcus said. "The question is, are you brave enough to use it?" Keisha looked around the room at these 4 people who believed in her. Mrs. Hartford, who'd protected her secret for 7 years. Elena, who'd come to make amends for her cowardice. Marcus, who saw her true potential. And Oliver, whose faith in her had started this entire journey. 7 years ago, I let one cruel man steal my dreams. Am I going to let another one keep them buried? She thought about her grandmother's music box, about the little girl who used to dance in the living room of their tiny apartment. That child had believed magic was possible, had trusted the universe to catch her when she leaped. Maybe it's time to leap again. "Okay," Keisha said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Okay. Let's show Boston what a real dancer looks like." Elena clapped her hands together, tears streaming down her face. Marcus nodded approvingly. Mrs. Hartford beamed like a proud mother. And Oliver smiled at her with such warmth and admiration that Keisha felt her heart skip. For the first time in 7 years, I'm not running away from who I am. I'm running toward her. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the ballroom, casting golden rectangles across the polished parquet floor. Keisha stood in the center of the room where she'd cleaned just yesterday, but everything felt different now. The mirrors no longer reflected a servant trying to remain invisible. They showed a woman preparing to reclaim her birthright. Elena had transformed one corner of the ballroom into a makeshift dressing area, complete with a portable bar, warm-up clothes, and a garment bag that held secrets Keisha wasn't ready to see. Marcus sat at the grand piano near the windows, his fingers moving over the keys as he played scales and warm-up exercises. "First things first," Elena said, clapping her hands together. "We need to see what we're working with. Strip down to your undergarments." Keisha hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. 7 years of hiding had made her forget what it felt like to be seen, really seen, by people who understood bodies as instruments of art. "It's just us, dear," Mrs. Hartford said gently from her chair near the door. "No judgment here. Only assessment." Oliver had positioned himself by the windows, ostensibly giving her privacy but close enough that his presence steadied her. As Keisha removed her gray uniform dress, she caught his reflection in the mirrors and saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. Like he was seeing her for the first time. In her simple black bra and underwear, Keisha felt exposed but not ashamed. Elena walked around her like a sculptor examining marble, her trained eye cataloging every line and curve. "Remarkable," Elena murmured. "Your posture has suffered from the cleaning work, but the foundation is still there. Your turnout is naturally beautiful. And your legs." She shook her head in wonder. 7 years of physical labor has given you power most dancers train a lifetime to achieve. Marcus stopped playing and turned to watch as Elena guided Keisha through basic positions. "Show me 5th position, arms in high 5th. Keisha's body remembered before her mind could protest. Her feet fell into perfect alignment, her arms curved overhead like she was embracing the sky. The position felt like coming home. Now tendu front, and hold. Her working leg extended, foot pointed in a line so clean it could cut glass. Marcus made a sound of approval from the piano. Beautiful. Now let's see your port de bras. For the next 20 minutes, Elena put Keisha through a gentle assessment, testing flexibility, strength, and muscle memory. With each movement, Keisha felt layers of armor falling away. The scared maid who'd entered this room was disappearing, replaced by the dancer who'd never really died. Enough, Elena finally said, her voice thick with emotion. Put on the warm-ups. It's time to dance. Oliver spoke for the first time since they'd started. Should I leave? Give you privacy to work. Stay, Keisha said quickly, surprised by her own boldness. Please. I think I need you here. Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability that matched her own. Are you sure? I'm not sure about anything, she admitted, pulling on the black leggings and fitted top Elena had brought. But I know I feel braver when you're watching. Marcus began playing The Blue Danube, the melody flowing through the room like liquid gold. Keisha's body responded instinctively, her spine lengthening, her arms finding their natural grace. Just listen for now, Elena said softly. Let the music remind you who you are. Keisha closed her eyes and let the waltz wash over her. 3/4 time, the eternal rhythm of romance and elegance. She could feel the steps in her muscle memory, the way her grandmother had taught her to let the music lead and trust her body to follow. Now, Elena whispered, dance for yourself. No technique, no judgment. Just move. And she did. Keisha let her body speak the language it had learned in childhood, the vocabulary of emotion made visible. She moved across the floor like water, like light, like all the dreams she'd buried trying to find their way back to the surface. Oliver watched from the windows, his reflection caught in the mirrors as he followed her movement. She could see the wonder in his face, the way his careful composure cracked to reveal something raw and beautiful underneath. When the music ended, the room was silent except for their breathing. Dear God, Marcus said quietly. Elena, she's even better than I remembered. Better than I ever dreamed, Elena agreed, wiping tears from her eyes. Keisha, what you just showed us. That's not technique that can be taught. That's pure artistry. Keisha stood in the center of the floor, her body singing with remembered joy. For 3 minutes, she'd been completely herself. No fear, no shame, no walls between her soul and the world. Now, Marcus said, rising from the piano bench, we need to teach this young man how to partner you properly. Oliver straightened, suddenly alert. Partner? I don't know how to dance. I mean, I learned basic social dancing at prep school, but nothing like. You don't need to be Baryshnikov, Elena said with a smile. You just need to frame her movement, support her turns, and trust her to make you both look good. For the next hour, they worked together. Marcus played while Elena demonstrated the basic waltz frame, showing Oliver how to hold Keisha, how to lead without controlling, how to be her foundation while she soared. At first, Oliver was stiff with self-consciousness, counting beats under his breath and apologizing for every misstep. But Keisha could feel the moment when he stopped thinking and started feeling. His hands on her waist became confident, his frame solid and sure. When she spun under his arm, he was there to catch her. When she needed support for a dramatic dip, his strength held her safe. Better, Elena called out. Oliver, stop thinking so much. Keisha, show him what you need. They moved together across the polished floor, finding their rhythm, discovering how their bodies fit together in the ancient conversation of leading and following. Oliver was a natural partner, intuitive and generous, more concerned with showcasing her than impressing anyone. During a break between songs, as they stood close together catching their breath, Oliver looked down at her with something like awe. I had no idea, he said quietly. I knew you were beautiful, but watching you dance is like watching someone paint with their entire soul. The compliment hit her deeper than any technical praise. He saw her artistry, but more than that, he saw her. I'd forgotten what it felt like, she admitted. To be seen for who I really am instead of who I'm pretending to be. I know the feeling. Oliver's thumb brushed across her knuckles where their hands joined. I've been pretending to be my father's son for so long, I forgot I had my own dreams. They were standing closer now, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The awareness between them shifted, deepened, became something that had nothing to do with dancing and everything to do with two lonely people recognizing their match. What happens after tonight? She asked. I don't know. His honesty was refreshing after years of careful lies. But for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of not knowing. Elena cleared her throat from across the room. If you two are finished making eyes at each other, we have work to do. They broke apart, both blushing, but the connection remained. Something had been acknowledged between them, something that made the upcoming performance about more than just proving Reginald wrong. Now, Marcus said, returning to the piano, let's work on your entrance. In 3 minutes, you need to tell the entire story of who you are and why you deserve to be seen. They practiced the opening sequence, Oliver's formal bow, Keisha's graceful curtsy, the moment when their eyes met and the music began. Each time they ran it, the chemistry between them grew stronger, more visible. Gorgeous, Elena breathed. You look at each other like you're sharing a beautiful secret. As the afternoon wore on, their confidence built. Oliver learned to anticipate Keisha's movements, to be her anchor while she flew. Keisha rediscovered the joy of partnership, of having someone strong enough to catch her when she leaped. By 5 o'clock, they were moving as one entity, their individual movements blending into something larger than either could achieve alone. Perfect, Marcus declared as they finished their final run-through. You're ready. Elena produced the garment bag with ceremony. Time for the final transformation. Inside was a dress that took Keisha's breath away. Deep sapphire blue silk that shimmered like starlight, cut to move with a dancer's body, elegant enough for any ballroom in the world. Matching shoes with ribbons that would wrap around her ankles like promises. It was mine, Elena said softly. From my debut with ABT 30 years ago. I always hoped I'd have a daughter to pass it to. She touched Keisha's cheek gently. Close enough. As Mrs. Hartford helped her into the dress, Keisha caught sight of herself in the mirrors. The woman looking back was no one she'd seen in 7 years. Confident, radiant, beautiful in the way that came from the inside out. Oliver's reflection appeared behind hers, and when their eyes met in the mirror, she saw her own wonder reflected in his face. Ready? He asked. Keisha thought about the scared maid who'd agreed to this challenge 24 hours ago. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who remembered what it felt like to be fearless. Ready, she said, and meant it. In 2 hours, they would either triumph together or fall together. But for the first time in years, Keisha wasn't afraid of falling. She was ready to fly. The foyer blazed with crystal and candlelight as Boston's elite arrived for what promised to be the social event of the season. Word of Reginald Pemberton's unprecedented challenge had spread through the city's upper echelons like wildfire, drawing society matrons, business moguls, and cultural influencers who wouldn't miss such spectacle for anything. Keisha stood in the servants' corridor, her hand pressed against the wall as she listened to the growing murmur of voices beyond. In Elena's sapphire dress, she looked every inch the prima ballerina she'd once been destined to become. But her stomach churned with the familiar cocktail of performance nerves and existential terror. Through the crack in the door, she could see guests streaming in. Margaret Whitfield, patron of the Boston Symphony. Senator Harrison and his wife. The Henderson family whose dinner invitation had started this entire cascade. At least 60 people, all expecting to witness her humiliation. Second thoughts. Oliver appeared beside her, magnificent in his black tuxedo. He transformed too over the past hours, shedding the careful emptiness she'd always seen in his eyes. Tonight he looked alive, dangerous, like a man who'd found something worth fighting for. Third and fourth thoughts, Keisha admitted. Look at them, Oliver. These are your people. After tonight, win or lose, everything changes for you. Good. His certainty surprised her. I've spent 29 years living other people's expectations. Maybe it's time to live my own. Before she could respond, Mrs. Hartford appeared in the corridor, her face pale with urgency. "You need to know," she said without preamble. "Your father has done something." Oliver's expression darkened. "What kind of something?" "He's invited additional guests. People with specific connections to Miss Washington's past." Keisha's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Hartford's voice dropped to a whisper. "Preston Kingsley's widow is here, along with 3 of the company directors who were bribed to blacklist you. And—" She paused, her face stricken. "Jerome Michaels." The name hit Keisha like a physical blow. Jerome Michaels, the critic whose scathing review of her final performance had been reprinted in newspapers across New England. The man whose words had helped convince her she was never meant to dance professionally. "My father invited them?" Oliver's voice carried deadly quiet. 20 minutes ago. They arrived through the back entrance so you wouldn't see them coming." Mrs. Hartford's hands shook. "He's turned this into something beyond a simple challenge. He wants to destroy her completely." Oliver's face transformed, rage replacing every trace of the compliant son. "Where is he?" "Oliver, don't." Keisha caught his arm. "This is exactly what he wants. You angry, me broken, both of us making mistakes. You don't understand what he's done." Oliver's jaw clenched. "Those people aren't just random observers. They're the architects of your destruction. He brought them here to watch you fail again." Through the door crack, Keisha could see Margaret Kingsley near the champagne table, her black dress and cold expression making her look like a raven among peacocks. At 65, Preston's widow still carried the imperious bearing of old money and older grudges. "She blames me," Keisha whispered, understanding flooding through her. "For her husband's heart attack, for the scandal when the truth came out about the bribes. She's here to watch me fall." "No." Oliver's voice was steel. "She's here to watch you rise. They all are, whether they know it or not." But Keisha could feel her carefully rebuilt confidence cracking. Facing Reginald's snobbery was one thing. Confronting the actual people who'd destroyed her life, who'd taken her dreams and ground them into dust, was something else entirely. "I can't," she breathed. "Not with them watching. Not with her looking at me like I killed her husband myself." "Yes, you can." Oliver turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You know who you are now. You remember your power. Don't let them take it again." Before Keisha could respond, the corridor door opened and Reginald appeared, resplendent in his formal wear and radiating cold satisfaction. "Ah, there's the happy couple." His smile was razor-sharp. "I trust you're both ready for this evening's entertainment." "Father." Oliver's voice could have frozen champagne. "We need to talk. After the performance, son. Our guests are waiting." Reginald's gaze shifted to Keisha, and she saw something in his eyes that made her skin crawl. Not just disdain, but anticipation. Like a cat watching a mouse it planned to torture before killing. "You look lovely, Miss Washington. That dress is quite ambitious for someone in your position." The casual cruelty in his tone made Oliver step protectively closer to Keisha. "Enough. Is it enough?" Reginald's eyebrows rose. "Because I have a surprise for you both. Some additional guests who were simply dying to see tonight's performance." "You bastard!" Oliver snarled. "Language, son. We have company." Reginald gestured toward the foyer. Mrs. Kingsley was particularly eager to attend. Something about wanting to see justice served. Keisha felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about proving her worth anymore. This was about public execution, about being forced to relive her worst failure in front of the very people who'd orchestrated it. "I won't do this," she said quietly. Both men turned to stare at her. "I won't be your entertainment. I won't dance for their amusement while they wait for me to crumble." Keisha's voice grew stronger. "Find another way to torture your son, Mr. Pemberton. I'm done." She turned to leave, but Oliver caught her hand. "Keisha, wait." "No." Tears blurred her vision. "You don't understand what those people did to me. What they stole. I can't face them again. I'm not that strong. You are. Oliver's voice was fierce. You're the strongest person I know. You survived 7 years of hiding, of shrinking yourself down to nothing, and you still managed to keep your light burning. My light went out a long time ago. Then why can I see it? Oliver stepped closer, his blue eyes blazing. Why does everyone in this house stop what they're doing to watch you move? Why did Elena and Marcus cross the city to find you? Why did I fall in love with you? The words hung in the air like bombs waiting to explode. Love. He'd said love. Reginald's expression twisted with disgust. You're being ridiculous, Oliver. You don't love her. You love the idea of rebelling against me. The novelty will wear off. Will it? Oliver never looked away from Keisha's face. Because I've never felt anything like this before. Never wanted to protect someone, to fight for someone, to build a life with someone. She's a maid, Reginald spat. She's an artist. A woman with more grace and dignity than anyone in that room full of vultures. Oliver's voice carried to the servants gathered in the corridor, to Mrs. Hartford with tears in her eyes, to anyone within hearing distance. And I love her. Keisha felt something break open in her chest. Not the painful shattering she'd expected, but something warm and bright and healing. He loved her. This man who could have anyone, who was being groomed to inherit an empire, loved her. But they're all waiting, she whispered. Let them wait. Oliver's thumb brushed away the tear on her cheek. We don't dance for them. We don't dance to prove anything to my father or to those people who tried to destroy you. We dance because we want to, because we choose to, because together we can do something beautiful. Reginald stepped forward, his face mottled with rage. If you walk away from this, Oliver, you walk away from everything. Your trust fund, your position in the company, your place in this family. I'll cut you off completely. Good. Oliver didn't even turn around. I never wanted any of it anyway. You'll have nothing. No money, no connections, no future worth living. I'll have her. Oliver's words were simple, final. That's everything. The declaration should have filled Keisha with joy, but instead she felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. If she walked away now, Oliver would lose his entire life. If she stayed and failed, she'd destroy both of them publicly. I can't let you sacrifice everything for me, she said. It's not sacrifice if I'm choosing what I want. Oliver took her hands, his touch steadying. The question is, what do you want? Keisha looked past him at Reginald's furious face, then through the door at the glittering crowd waiting to watch her stumble. Margaret Kingsley stood near the ballroom entrance, her cold eyes scanning the foyer like a hunter searching for prey. These people had taken her dreams once. They'd convinced her she was worthless, talentless, meant for invisibility. If she ran now, they would win again. They would keep the story that she was nothing more than a delusional girl who'd reached too high. But if she stayed, if she danced, she could rewrite the ending. I want, Keisha said, her voice growing stronger, to show them who I really am. Oliver's smile was radiant. Then let's go dancing. As they walked toward the ballroom, Reginald's voice followed them like a curse. You're both making the biggest mistake of your lives. Maybe they were. But as Keisha felt Oliver's strength beside her and remembered the power flowing through her veins, she realized that some mistakes were worth making. Some risks were worth taking. Some dances were worth everything. The ballroom doors loomed before them like gates to another world. Through the frosted glass panels, Keisha could see the shimmer of gowns and the gleam of formal wear, could hear the low murmur of conversation punctuated by crystal laughter. 60 of Boston's most influential people waited inside, their expectations hanging in the air like smoke. Oliver stood beside her, his hand steady at the small of her back. But she could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of what he'd just sacrificed settling into his shoulders. In the space of 5 minutes, he'd lost his inheritance, his position, his entire future as he'd known it. All for her. Last chance, she whispered, not looking at him. You can still go back in there, apologize to your father, marry Catherine. I'll disappear, And in 6 months, this will all be a story you tell yourself about the time you almost threw everything away for a maid. Is that what you want? Oliver's voice was quiet, steady. For me to choose the safe path? Keisha closed her eyes, feeling the phantom weight of 7 years of hiding, of making herself small, of choosing survival over dreams. I want you to be happy. Then stop asking me to abandon the only thing that's ever made me feel alive. She turned to look at him then, this man who'd given up everything for 3 minutes of truth. His blue eyes held no regret, no second thoughts, only a certainty that took her breath away. What if we fail? She asked. What if I freeze up in there? What if I can't remember the steps? What if? Then we fail together. Oliver's fingers found hers, intertwining. But Keisha, what if we don't? Before she could answer, the ballroom doors swung open. Marcus appeared, magnificent in his formal attire, his expression grave but determined. The audience is seated, he said quietly. Your father has made quite a production of this, Oliver. Full orchestra, spotlights, even a raised platform for the performance. Keisha's stomach dropped. A platform. Center stage, elevated 6 inches so everyone has a perfect view. Marcus's eyes were kind but honest. He's not leaving anything to chance. This is designed to be either your greatest triumph or your most public humiliation. Through the open doors, Keisha caught a glimpse of the ballroom's transformation. The furniture had been pushed back to create a performance space, with chairs arranged in a horseshoe around a polished wooden platform. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving light. And there, in the front row, sat Margaret Kingsley. Preston's widow held herself with the rigid posture of old grief and older hatred, her black dress a stark contrast to the colorful gowns around her. When she caught sight of Keisha in the doorway, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She's waiting for me to crumble, Keisha breathed. Let her wait, Elena's voice came from behind them. Keisha turned to find her former teacher approaching, her face set with fierce determination. I've been watching that woman for the past hour, listening to her hold court about how dancers from certain backgrounds lack the discipline for serious artistry. What did you say to her? Oliver asked. Nothing. Yet. Elena's smile was sharp as glass. But after you dance, after you show this room what real artistry looks like, I'm going to have a very public conversation with Mrs. Kingsley about her late husband's taste for teenage dancers. The threat hung in the air, promising that Margaret Kingsley's attempt to destroy Keisha would backfire spectacularly. But first, Keisha had to survive the next 3 minutes. The music is cued, Marcus said. The orchestra is ready. All we need is your signal. Keisha felt the moment crystallizing around her. Everything that had led to this point, every choice and consequence and revelation, narrowed down to a single decision. Step onto that platform or walk away. Reclaim her identity or let it stay buried forever. What would Nana do? The answer came not in words but in memory. Her grandmother's hands guiding her through her first waltz steps, her voice warm with love and certainty. Dancing is praying with your body, baby girl. It's telling God you trust him to catch you when you fall. I need a minute, Keisha said. Alone. Oliver squeezed her hand once, then released her. Elena nodded, understanding. Marcus stepped back to give her space. They formed a protective circle around her, shielding her from the curious eyes of passing guests. Keisha pressed her palms against the cool wall, trying to center herself. Her reflection stared back from the polished marble, and for a moment she saw herself as the audience would. A black woman in a ballroom full of white wealth, a servant pretending to be a star, a girl who'd reached too high before and been slapped down for her audacity. That's their story about me. But what's my story about me? She thought about the woman who'd walked into this house 7 years ago, broken and convinced she was worthless. That woman had built a life from nothing, had survived every cruelty and indignity, had kept her soul intact even when everything else was stripped away. She thought about the child who'd danced in her grandmother's living room, who'd believed magic was possible, who'd never met a dream too big to chase. She thought about the artist Elena and Marcus saw when they looked at her, the one whose talent transcended technique, whose movement told stories that made grown men weep. All of those women are me. The broken one, the surviving one, The dreaming one, the artist. I don't have to choose between them anymore. When she opened her eyes, her reflection had changed. Not the nervous maid or the defiant survivor, but someone new. Someone whole. I'm ready, she said, turning back to face the others. Oliver stepped forward first, offering his arm. Together! Together! They walked through the ballroom doors as partners, as equals, as two people who'd found something worth fighting for. The conversation died as guests turned to watch their entrance. Keisha felt the weight of every stare, every judgment, every expectation, but she didn't shrink from it. The platform waited in the center of the room, surrounded by faces that ranged from curious to hostile to predatory. Reginald sat in the place of honor, his expression coldly satisfied. Catherine Vanderbilt clutched her mother's arm, her perfect composure cracked with jealousy and disbelief. And in the front row, Margaret Kingsley watched with the patience of a spider in its web. Ladies and gentlemen, Reginald's voice carried across the room. As promised, we have entertainment for this evening. My son Oliver and our employee, Miss Washington, have agreed to perform a waltz. Should they succeed in dancing for 3 minutes without embarrassing themselves, I have agreed to certain considerations. The polite laughter that followed made Keisha's skin crawl. They thought this was a game, an amusing diversion to break up the tedium of another society dinner. Oliver helped her onto the platform, his touch steady and sure. As they took their positions in the center of the raised stage, the room fell completely silent. Any last words of wisdom for the happy couple? Reginald asked, his voice dripping with false joviality. Marcus stood and moved to the orchestra conductor's position. Just one, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room. 7 years ago, this woman was destroyed by lies and corruption. Tonight, she reclaims her truth. The statement sent ripples through the audience. Margaret Kingsley's face went white. Several guests leaned forward in their chairs, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing more than just a dance. Elena appeared at the edge of the platform, her face radiant with pride. The piece is Strauss's The Blue Danube, she announced. 3 minutes of music that will show you what real artistry looks like. As Marcus raised his baton, Keisha felt Oliver's hand at her waist, solid and reassuring. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of their lives. Whatever happens, Oliver whispered, so quietly only she could hear, I love you. I love you too, she whispered back, the words flowing from her heart without hesitation. Marcus's baton fell. The first notes of the waltz filled the air. And Keisha Washington, who had spent 7 years hiding from the world, stepped into the light and began to dance. The room held its breath as she and Oliver moved into their opening positions. Every eye was fixed on them, waiting for the stumble, the mistake, the confirmation of their assumptions about class and worth and who deserved to dream. Instead, they saw magic. Keisha's body remembered everything she'd been taught to forget. Her feet found the rhythm like coming home. Her arms curved with liquid grace. And when Oliver spun her under his arm, when he dipped her low and brought her back to safety, when he framed her movement with his own steady strength, they moved as one soul in 2 bodies. The audience forgot to breathe. They forgot to judge. They forgot everything except the beauty unfolding before them. Margaret Kingsley sat forward in her chair, her hatred wavering in the face of something she couldn't deny. Reginald's cold satisfaction cracked, replaced by dawning disbelief. And in the center of it all, Keisha danced. She danced for her grandmother, for her buried dreams, for 7 years of silence. She danced for Oliver, who'd chosen her over everything. She danced for every person who'd ever been told they weren't enough, weren't worthy, weren't allowed to reach for the stars. She danced like the artist she'd always been, like the woman she was finally brave enough to become. And when the music swelled toward its climax, when the final minute began, Keisha Washington looked out at the sea of faces watching her and smiled. Let them see who I really am. The final notes of The Blue Danube soared through the ballroom as Keisha and Oliver completed their last turn. She was breathless, radiant, every line of her body singing with the joy of movement reclaimed. For 3 minutes, she had been purely herself, not the maid, not the victim, not the woman society said she should be, but the artist she was born to be. The silence that followed was deafening. 60 of Boston's elite sat frozen in their chairs, their champagne glasses forgotten, their careful composures shattered by what they had just witnessed. This was not the awkward stumbling they had expected, not the confirmation of their prejudices about class and breeding and who deserved to occupy their rarefied world. This was transcendent artistry, the kind that made cynics believe in beauty again. Oliver still held her close, his chest rising and falling with exertion, his blue eyes blazing with pride and love and wonder. "You were magnificent," he breathed against her ear. Before Keisha could respond, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the silence like gunshots. Senator Harrison rose from his seat, his weathered face transformed by genuine awe. "Extraordinary," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Simply extraordinary." The dam broke. Applause erupted from every corner of the ballroom, not the polite clapping of social obligation but the thunderous ovation reserved for moments of true greatness. Women dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. Men who hadn't been moved by anything in years found themselves on their feet, applauding a performance that had reminded them what it felt like to witness magic. Margaret Whitfield, the stern patron of the Boston Symphony, stood and called out, "Brava! Absolutely brava!" Through the crowd, Keisha saw Elena weeping openly, her face radiant with vindicated faith. Marcus stood by the orchestra, his own eyes bright with tears, nodding as if to say, "Yes, this is what I remembered. This is what they tried to destroy." But in the front row, two faces remained unmoved. Reginald Pemberton sat rigid in his chair, his knuckles white where they gripped the armrests. His carefully laid trap had backfired spectacularly. His cruel challenge transformed into a showcase for the very qualities he'd sought to mock. Beside him, Margaret Kingsley looked as if she'd been slapped. The woman who had come to witness Keisha's humiliation instead found herself confronting undeniable proof of the talent her late husband had tried to destroy. As the applause finally died, Reginald stood slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury, but Keisha could see something else underneath, the dawning realization that he had lost far more than a bet tonight. "Well," he said, his voice carrying false joviality that fooled no one, "I suppose that concludes our little entertainment." "Does it?" Elena's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stepped forward, her dancer's posture making her seem taller, more commanding than her modest height suggested. "Because I think this audience deserves to know the full story of what they just witnessed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret Kingsley half rose from her chair, alarm flashing across her features. "7 years ago," Elena continued, her voice projecting to every corner of the ballroom, "this woman was one of the most promising dancers Boston had ever produced. Companies from New York to London were courting her. She had the kind of raw talent that appears maybe once in a generation." She turned to face Margaret Kingsley directly. And then she was systematically destroyed by a man who couldn't bear the thought of losing his inheritance to an inconvenient love affair. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Margaret Kingsley sank back into her chair, her face draining of color. Marcus stepped forward to join Elena. Preston Kingsley didn't just end his relationship with Miss Washington. He paid bribes to company directors, choreographers, and critics to ensure she would never work professionally in dance again. "We have documentation," Elena added, her voice ringing with righteous fury. "Sworn affidavits, financial records, testimony from those who took his money and now wish to clear their consciences." Margaret Kingsley stood abruptly, her black dress rustling like raven wings. "This is slander," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "My husband was a patron of the arts, a supporter of—" "Your husband was a predator," Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Miss Washington was not his first victim. Our investigation has uncovered at least 6 young dancers whose careers he destroyed when they refused his advances or when he tired of them." The gasps that followed were audible. Several women in the audience looked stricken, perhaps recognizing patterns they had chosen not to see, stories they had chosen not to believe. Margaret Kingsley's composure finally cracked. "You have no proof," she said, but the words came out as a plea rather than a denial. Elena smiled, cold and beautiful and utterly without mercy. "We have everything, Margaret. Bank records, hotel receipts, Testimony from witnesses who were afraid to speak while he was alive. The Boston Globe is running the full exposé tomorrow morning. The widow stumbled backward as if physically struck. Around the room, guests began to understand the magnitude of what had been revealed. This was not just about a dance challenge or class divisions. This was about justice long delayed, about a talented woman reclaiming her stolen birthright. Reginald stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. This is all very dramatic, but it doesn't change the fundamental issue. My son has made his choice, and I've made mine. The agreement stands as stated. What agreement? Oliver's voice was steady, confident. You mean the one where if Keisha could dance with me for 3 minutes without embarrassing herself, you would pay for our wedding? The reminder silenced the room. Everyone remembered Reginald's exact words from the night before, his mocking challenge that had seemed so impossible then. I was speaking hypothetically, Reginald said, but his voice lacked its usual command. You were speaking in front of witnesses, Senator Harrison interjected. 60 witnesses, to be precise. Including several lawyers, added Mrs. Patterson, the judge's wife, with obvious relish. A verbal contract in the presence of witnesses is legally binding in Massachusetts. Reginald's face went through several shades of red and purple. You can't be serious. Deadly serious, Oliver said, moving to stand beside Keisha. You made a public challenge based on your assumption that she would fail. She didn't fail. She soared. Now you need to honor your word. I'll do no such thing. Then you'll do something you've never done in 63 years, Oliver replied calmly. You'll publicly break your word in front of Boston society. I wonder how that will affect your business relationships. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Reginald's empire was built on trust, on his reputation for keeping his commitments. To renege on such a public promise would damage him far beyond this single incident. As father and son stared at each other across the silent ballroom, Keisha felt the weight of decision settling around them all. This was the moment of final reckoning, when years of carefully maintained power structures would either hold or crumble. Margaret Kingsley broke first. Without another word, she gathered her purse and fled toward the exit, unwilling to face further revelations about her late husband's crimes. Her departure seemed to release something in the room, a collective exhale as people began to understand that the old order was shifting. Reginald looked around at the faces watching him, seeing for the first time how many of his peers were regarding him with something dangerously close to disgust. His cruelty had always been tolerated as eccentricity, but tonight he had revealed something uglier, something that crossed lines even Boston society wouldn't ignore. Fine, he said finally, his voice bitter with defeat. If my son wishes to throw away his birthright for a servant, I won't stand in his way. She's not a servant, Oliver said quietly. She never was. She's an artist, and she's going to be my wife. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Keisha felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy now, of vindication, of dreams reclaimed and love acknowledged. Elena stepped forward and took Keisha's hands. There's something else, she said, her voice warm with excitement. The New York Contemporary Ballet has been looking for a principal dancer with classical training and contemporary sensibilities. After tonight's performance, I think they'll be very interested in meeting with you. And the Cambridge Academy always needs teachers, Marcus added with a smile. Particularly ones who understand what it means to overcome adversity. Keisha looked around the ballroom at the faces watching her with new respect, new understanding. 7 years ago, she had left the dance world broken and convinced she was worthless. Tonight, she was returning to it as herself, scarred but not defeated, changed but not diminished, ready to claim her place among the artists and dreamers and believers in impossible things. Oliver took her hand, lifting it to his lips to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. So, Miss Washington, he said, loud enough for the room to hear, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The proposal was met with spontaneous applause from the audience. Through her tears, Keisha saw Mrs. Hartford beaming from the doorway, Elena and Marcus holding each other in joy, even Senator Harrison raising his champagne glass in salute. Yes, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. Yes, I will. As Oliver swept her into his arms for a kiss that sealed their promise, the ballroom erupted in celebration. The orchestra, without prompting, began to play again, and other couples moved onto the dance floor, drawn by the magic of the moment. Outside, snow began to fall on Boston, blanketing the city in fresh possibility. Inside the Pemberton mansion, two people who had found their way back to themselves danced together, surrounded by the kind of love that conquers all obstacles. Some fairy tales, it turned out, were worth believing in after all. 6 months later, Keisha stood in the wings of the David H. Koch Theater, her body humming with familiar pre-performance energy. Through the gap in the curtains, she could see the audience filling the seats for the New York Contemporary Ballet's summer season premiere. 3,000 people had come to witness her professional debut with the company, her first performance on a major stage since that terrible night 7 years ago. But tonight felt nothing like that long-ago failure. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. 5 minutes to places, the stage manager called. Elena appeared beside her, radiant in a midnight blue gown. "Nervous?" she asked, adjusting Keisha's costume with the fussing care of a proud mother. "Excited," Keisha corrected, surprised to find it was true. The crushing anxiety that had defined her relationship with performance was gone, replaced by something she'd almost forgotten: pure joy at the prospect of dancing. "Good. Channel that excitement." Elena's eyes sparkled. "The Times critic is here tonight. So is the artistic director from Paris Opera Ballet. After they see what you can do." "One thing at a time," Keisha laughed, but her heart soared at the possibilities. 6 months ago, she'd been scrubbing floors. Tonight, she was a principal dancer with one of America's most prestigious companies. The fairy tale was still unfolding. In the audience, Oliver sat in the front row wearing his new favorite expression, unabashed pride. Beside him, Mrs. Hartford dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, resplendent in the emerald dress Oliver had insisted on buying her for the occasion. "She's going to be magnificent," Mrs. Hartford whispered. "She already is," Oliver replied, his voice warm with wonder that hadn't faded in 6 months of marriage. Their wedding had been everything Reginald's challenge was not: intimate, joyful, and absolutely authentic. 40 people gathered in the Cambridge Academy of Dance on an April morning bright with spring sunshine. Elena had given Keisha away, Marcus had played the wedding march, and Mrs. Hartford had cried through the entire ceremony. Reginald hadn't attended, of course. In the months following the infamous dinner party, he'd grown increasingly isolated. The Boston Globe's exposé of the Preston Kingsley scandal had sent shockwaves through the city's cultural establishment, and Reginald's cruel treatment of Keisha had not been forgotten. Business associates began avoiding him. Social invitations dwindled. The empire he'd built on ruthless networking started cracking at its foundation. Oliver had made one attempt at reconciliation, driving to the Beacon Hill mansion on a rainy Tuesday in May. He'd found his father alone in his study, looking older and smaller than Oliver remembered. "I don't expect forgiveness," Oliver had said. "But I wanted you to know that I'm happy. Truly happy, for the first time in my life." Reginald had stared out the window at the rain-soaked garden. "Your mother would have liked her," he'd said finally. It was the closest thing to an apology Oliver would ever receive. They'd sold Reginald's wedding gift to them, a sprawling house in Cambridge that neither wanted, and used the money to buy a cozy brownstone near the dance academy. Oliver had enrolled in a master's program in elementary education at Boston University, finally pursuing the dreams he'd buried for decades. His professors were amazed by his natural gift for connecting with children, his ability to make learning feel like play. "I spent so many years in rooms full of people who'd forgotten how to wonder about anything," he'd told Keisha one evening as they walked along the Charles River. "Kids still believe in magic. They still think anything is possible." "Smart kids," she'd replied, taking his hand. The Preston Kingsley exposé had indeed run in the Boston Globe, exactly as Elena had promised. The story revealed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning 2 decades, complete with financial records of the bribes paid to silence his victims. 3 more women had come forward after the article's publication, sharing their own stories of destroyed careers and stolen dreams. Margaret Kingsley had fled to her family's estate in the Berkshires and hadn't been seen in Boston society since. The Kingsley Foundation, once a major patron of the arts, had quietly dissolved, its assets distributed to organizations supporting victims of sexual harassment. Catherine Vanderbilt had initially been devastated by Oliver's rejection, but by summer she was engaged to a banker from Philadelphia who appreciated her equestrian skills and didn't make her question everything she believed about herself. At the engagement party, she'd actually sought out Oliver to thank him. "You did me a favor," she'd said with surprising sincerity. "I was so busy trying to be what I thought you wanted that I'd forgotten who I actually was." Marcus had become a regular presence in Oliver and Keisha's life, joining them for Sunday dinners where he regaled them with stories from his performing days and helped Keisha prepare for auditions. He'd also become Elena's frequent companion, their shared passion for nurturing young talent blossoming into something deeper and more personal. The Cambridge Academy had thrived under Elena's expanded program of scholarships for underprivileged students, funded in part by anonymous donations from Oliver's trust fund. He'd been cut off from his father's money, but his mother's inheritance had remained intact, providing them with financial security and the ability to support causes they believed in. "Places, everyone," the stage manager called. Keisha took her position in the wings, her body coiled with readiness. The ballet was a contemporary piece about transformation, about butterflies emerging from cocoons, about the courage required to become who you were meant to be. The choreographer had created the role specifically for her, after seeing video of her audition performance. As the curtain rose and the lights blazed, Keisha thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Scared, hidden, convinced she was nothing more than what others told her she was. That woman had been brave enough to say yes to an impossible challenge, to trust a stranger who saw her value, to believe that love might be stronger than fear. The music began, and Keisha stepped into the light. She danced for her grandmother, whose music box sat on her dressing room table every night. She danced for Elena and Marcus, who'd never stopped believing in second chances. She danced for Mrs. Hartford, who'd kept her secrets and protected her dreams. She danced for Oliver, who'd chosen love over legacy and never once regretted it. But mostly, she danced for herself. For the little girl who'd twirled in a tiny apartment and believed in magic. For the broken woman who'd learned to survive in the shadows. For the artist who'd never really died, just waited patiently to be reborn. As the final note soared through Lincoln Center and 3,000 people rose to their feet in thunderous applause, Keisha Washington Pemberton stood center stage and smiled. She was exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be. Sometimes, if you were brave enough to leap, the universe really would catch you when you fell. And sometimes, fairy tales were just true stories waiting for the right moment to unfold. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.